Hello, everybody. This is a new episode of the Roscoe's Wetsuit podcast. I am your host, Toby Passman, coming at you from Deerfield Beach, Florida, right before we get smacked by Mr. Dorian, the hurricane that is crushing the Bahamas at the moment. Very sad. But yeah, so a quick, pre-storm show recording was in the works. So I've got a great guest on today, but before I introduce him, I'm going to go through the real lyric of the day. This is coming from Kanye West from his album 808s and Heartbreak, one of my favorite Kanye albums. This is the song Welcome to Heartbreak. So he says, Dad cracked a joke, all the kids laughed, but I couldn't hear him all the way in first class. Chased the good life my whole life long. Look back on my life and my life gone. Where did I go wrong? So there's one of his verses, just a quick verse in the song. And, kind of what I got out of that was, someone, of his stature where it's sort of, we see sort of the celebrity life of, glitz and glam and this chase to kind of acquire material possession. He kind of, I feel like he kind of comments on that, that desire maybe not, bringing him happiness. I mean, look back on my life and my life gone. Where did I go wrong? Maybe some sort of self-doubt with, he's looking at, just a dad making a joke, with his kids, just kind of a very simple pleasure in life. And maybe seeing how that, just something like that could actually make you a lot more happy potentially than all material wealth and a lot of those things that are, we so commonly hear just in a lot of pop culture, but rap in particular, I think. So that's what I got out of that lyric. But now to introduce, I got a special guest on here. This is my boy, Karl Wallenkampf. Karl is a cold brew enthusiast, cold brew master, as far as brewing his own, as well as I've come to learn right now, a pizza and salsa man as well. So kind of Karl, you'd probably call yourself a Renaissance man, right? A man of many trades.
Yeah, the rebirth hasn't been too painful for anyone, hopefully. But yeah, I would love to be a Renaissance man.
There we go. Well, Karl is a medical student right now. You're in what year again?
I just finished my third year.
Finish your third year.
Mhm.
Okay, so we were just talking that so we met after your first year in the summer. You
Yeah,
came up to Eugene, Oregon, where I was going to college at the University of Oregon at the time, and you were kind of interning in a research lab that I was
yeah,
interning at over the summer,
yeah.
and going over heart rate variability, learning kind of the in-depth mechanisms and studying the heart and kind of stress resilience. So that was some cool stuff. But yeah, man, I think we had some great conversations back then, and we started hanging outside the lab a little bit. I
Yeah,
wish you had longer there because
yeah.
I had
Me
some fun
too.
times hanging out.
Yeah, me too. I always free invite back over to my place. My the lake is always open in the summertime. So next time we're both in Oregon together, we gotta hit that
Uh,
lake again.
I'll certainly take you up on that without a doubt. Without a doubt.
That's, dude, you killed the wakeboarding that day, man. It was
Oh
awesome.
man, I tried. After that, it was like the first half of the day was like that learning curve, like where I was
Yeah.
like, "Am I gonna stand up?" Like, but then once you're actually standing up, yeah, it's not too
Yeah,
bad.
yeah, it's not too bad. It's fun.
Yeah, yeah, but you're showing me the ropes, taught me how to wakeboard a little bit, so
Yeah,
appreciate it.
yeah, my pleasure.
But yeah, so I'm really happy to have Karl, happy to have you on the show today. And I kind of wanted to start off with, you know, kind of talking about your, choice, your journey through med school.
Mhm.
Because, I remember talking to a lot of people in the kind of the biology and human phys courses that I was doing, and a lot of people who were like very much on the fence about med school, and
Yeah.
it's like you have to make a very serious decision and a serious commitment, to do that,
Yeah.
kind of at a very young age. So I'm curious your thoughts on that, and kind of if you could kind of tell us, where your, kind of what spurred you into that decision.
Yeah. So the thing that mostly spurred me on to the decision is I'm blessed to have um, a really encouraging dad in my life who is a physician, and he decided to be a doctor back in the day because in the 60s, I think it was in the 60s, he had an uncle who was a doctor, and he had a pool in his backyard. And so my dad thought, well, you know what? There's a pool in the backyard. I'll try to be a doctor. And back then it was a really good gig because student loan debt wasn't the way it is then. So he was actually able to get into med school and pay his way by working. The game is very different now because now you can't just pay for college by working a job in the summertime. You can't pay for med school by working a job in the summertime and
Yeah.
during the year. Like,
Better have a really good job. You better be making like six figures if you're trying to do that.
exactly. You need to already be a professional, and already have a job in order to pay to go to school. But the reason I decided is my dad would tell me stories about the time that he had in the emergency department. So he'd tell me stories about patients he had seen. He obviously wouldn't use their names or identifying characteristics, but he would share things with me. And those stories about being able to help people and being those crucial moments in their lives were just so inspiring to me. So that's kind of the path that I really chose to follow early on. That was high school. College tripped me up a little. I wasn't so sure. I loved the humanities, reading, literature. I did a Bachelor of Arts in Humanities. And so that sort of pulled me away a little bit, but I decided I really wanted to affirm. And I thought that medicine did a few things. One is that it was deeply practical. I love the humanities, and I think they are of supreme value in and of themselves, but I love the idea of the practicality of medicine. I mean, someone can be suffering and in pain, and that someone that you can be a part of uplifting them and make them better. Another thing is I love the complexity of it. It's something that I knew I would never master, like an entire lifetime. So I just thought, what a challenge, that'd be an amazing thing to do. And the third thing is it's just, I don't know, it's a profession. So it's not simply a job necessarily that you clock in and clock out, but it turns into kind of a way of life. And it turns into something that's both at your job and outside of your job. You let people know that you're a physician and they can ask you things, they can feel free to approach you. And it's kind of this holistic lifestyle that I really wanted to follow. And it'll be a way to apply the humanities, a way to apply what I love about psychology and about people, along with this practical medicine. So that's sort of what led me to choose medicine.
Mm-hmm.
But certainly it becomes like a new choice every day when you're in medical school.
Uh-huh.
Med school will beat you down.
So I've heard. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's awesome, man, that you found a way to kind of integrate all of these, various interests of yours into, a career that I think, sounds like you're super passionate about. And I think that's awesome. As far as you mentioned, your dad kind of telling you these stories. Was this, you were saying like high school was kind of when those
I
conversations were happening, or was that earlier as a kid?
It was pretty early. He was this was actually like in grade school. In grade
Okay.
school, he would, every now and then he would come into my room and put me to bed, and then he would like scratch my back and tell me stories about the emergency department. And like to me, that was ideal because it's sort of like all the people who like watching Grey's Anatomy and ER. So you get that, but you also get a back rub at the same time. So like,
Man,
I want to do that.
yeah, who's gonna complain about that? Yeah.
Can't complain.
That right. So you were kind of opened up to the possibilities of what it would be like to be a doctor. And did that sort of interest you at that young age? Did you kind of hear those stories and be like, wow, like I really want to be like, like my dad in this way?
Yeah, it didn't hit me. I wanted to, I back then I was inoculated in the beauty of gender roles. So I was like, oh, I could be a fireman, I could be a policeman, I could be an engineer, all the little boy things.
Yeah.
So I ran through those like in a little bop, 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 and I enjoyed playing all of those in my own life. But pretty quickly, it was like third grade when I started telling people I wanted to be a doctor. And for a long time, that was just kind of a cool thing to say. You could tell people, I want to be a doctor, and everyone thinks you're an amazing person, even though you haven't done anything yet. So I'd recommend actually to anyone to tell people you're going to be a doctor, because everyone's really impressed, even if you aren't going to be one. Uh,
Yeah, it's probably like a good idea, if your, significant other, if your girlfriend, is going taking you to meet her family, that's probably a good line to bring up, right? Wouldn't you
it's
say?
a great one.
I'm planning to become a
I've won
doctor.
over a lot of mothers with the line, I'm going to be a doctor someday.
I could
Uh,
imagine. Yeah.
The problem is I think every child has an innate desire to rebel against their parents. So you have to be careful winning over parents, because then the children don't want to please their parents, and so then you lose the person. So there's
Yeah,
good
there's that.
balance.
Right. Right.
We all have
Interesting.
our good reasons for being something and our bad reasons for being something, and I have a few of both.
Sure. Sure. So that's interesting. So was it this was towards the end of undergrad where you made the decision to apply to med school?
Yeah, end of undergrad. So generally speaking, there's an application during the senior year. So you apply during the fall of your senior year. So I
Okay.
I pretty much decided during my third year of college that I was going to apply. So I had to study for the MCAT, which is sort of like the SAT of for med school. So I studied for that, did that, um, and then I applied, and so it was, and then I got a call that I could go, and that was a pretty good night. It was a good night.
Awesome. So
Yeah.
I'm curious what was what was going on in your brain at that point where that when junior year of high school where you sort of made that decision like I'm gonna go and apply to med school. Were you kind of from that time up until when you actually took the test, got in, found a med school that you were going to go to? Was there much kind of hesitations or like thinking, oh, maybe I should still do something else, or were you kind of like just locked into that route?
I think before I applied, because I applied my senior year of college. I think there was a fair amount of hesitation during college, um, because it's not necessarily a cakewalk to get in.
Hmm.
And so there were times when I got bad grades, and there was a year where I was struggling. Like it was a hard year. I had a job. I went to a religiously affiliated school, and I am myself a Christian. So I was a spiritual vice president of the student association. And one might ask what that is. And it's a person who just kind of brings in speakers and is present at like worship services, try to organize things, mostly like make people happy with food. It's kind of the number one thing. But I had that going on, and I was in these organic chemistry classes and cellular biology classes, and I was trying to organize like talks and meetings, but then up late at night trying to count little tiny flies called Drosophila,
Hmm.
that we had mutated. I don't know, like Drosophila is something that is a type of fly that you can learn like genetics with. So we had all these flies that are like breeding, and you're having to count like 1,000 flies per night, which ones are different types. And that doing that for a few months, that was a time of big challenge. And for some reason, like I kind of kept going with it, but I wouldn't I wouldn't necessarily recommend. I wouldn't say anyone has to do it, but for
Hmm.
me, hold true.
Right. Right. It was the right choice for you. Yeah. Yeah. I think, I mean, it seems like, I think people go into it obviously with different reasons, and sometimes it's more of a, seems kind of more of like a pressure thing, like whether they
Yeah,
feel like pressured maybe by society because, doctors are, rightly so, very well respected. So they're like, I'm going to do this to, earn a good living and, maybe make my parents happy. Um, which are valid, good, valid, maybe reasons, but at the same time, maybe not the best way to actually pick a
right,
career when because you want to be doing what you are passionate about, not what you think is going to make someone else or society kind of at large
right,
happy with your decision. That's how
right.
I see it.
I agree with that. I mean, I have I have people in my class who I think might be here, more because of influences outside of themselves than maybe because of themselves. And I feel so sorry for people who have that life. They're here and they don't want to be here
Mm,
because it's a grueling, soul crushing thing to be a part of. Medical school is if you don't really want to put yourself through it. So I feel
right.
sorry for that. And I mean, there is the balance where like if we all did exactly what we were passionate about, you know, the system might break down completely.
Maybe a
But
little bit, yeah.
who knows? That might be a good thing. And but on the other hand, like there's a certain level of, I respect people who do things because their family wants them to do it and whatnot. If they find a love of it because there are things to love, but certainly I think that sometimes people will end up negatively affecting a profession
Hmm.
if they do it based on reasons that aren't related to their own passion or their own will. So
Hmm. Do you find like kids maybe in your class, you mentioned some that, you can kind of sense that there is some kind of external pressure. Do you
yeah,
get the sense that, the ones who maybe like yourself are very self-motivated and have this, I think probably at that point, I'm guessing for you, it definitely seems like this, but I'm guessing for a lot of maybe most other people too, where there's not just this sort of thing, like in high school where it was like it didn't really necessarily matter the class. It was like, oh, I just got to get a good grade.
yeah,
But with med school, it's like there's an overarching purpose to all of this.
yeah,
You're doing this, as we were talking about, because you want to help people, because
yeah.
you see a lot of suffering in the world, and want to kind of be a force for good. And I think that, can probably like help you, kind of fight through a lot of those long sleepless nights, doing
Yeah,
tasks, right? It seems like
yeah,
when you're on a
it
mission, right?
it does. Yeah, I think for people who have that mission mindset, it makes a huge difference. I know there are little ways of there are little. I try to key in every now and then. Like there are times when I will really feel the sense of just privilege and blessing and being able to be a part of medicine. Like there was one night when I was the sun was setting, and I live in Loma Linda, California, and the sun sets everywhere in the West, but the sun sets in the West, and so you're kind of in this valley here, and the hospital is to the west of me. So I was driving towards the west, and I saw the hospital, and I saw a helicopter flying in, and Loma Linda is a tertiary medical center, so it takes some pretty high level complexity patients. So there will be smaller hospitals that will send their patients to Loma Linda. And so I saw this helicopter coming in, and the sun was just like this golden sun was glinting off of the hospital, and this helicopter that was hovering and coming in. And it kind of filled me with this sense of wonder that the very best place for that person to be or that child to be who's being carried in by that helicopter is that hospital. And the reason for that is there are people in that hospital who have dedicated their lives, they've dedicated their free time to saving people's lives. And so just I had this deep sense of um, gratefulness to be a part of something where people are working to heal others. And just that image of
Mm.
the helicopter coming in and bringing someone in, it was very meaningful to me. And so things like that have helped me through med school, like listening to ambulance sirens and thinking like that's the reason I'm doing this, or hearing a helicopter overhead and thinking that's the reason I'm doing this. Those things really help through
Right.
long.
Yeah, no, those sound like super, super powerful experiences. Um, and you had kind of told me a little about, some of your experiences with med school. I'm curious as far as, one of the things you brought up, kind of one of the big challenges was with child psychiatry, right?
Yeah.
And kind of just seeing, these struggling kids,
Yeah.
from all sorts of backgrounds, right? Can you talk a little
Yeah.
about kind of what that experience was like and maybe, some of the things that kind of taught you or maybe opened your eyes to?
Yeah. I during my psychiatry rotation, I spent 3 weeks doing child psychiatry, and there aren't enough child psychiatrists to meet the need, and so there is a psych hospital here where children are allowed to come, and I don't think they take anyone younger than maybe 8 or 9. I think that's sort of like the youngest age at which anyone can benefit from what a psych hospital offers, because younger than that, essentially they don't have as many problems. And then the other problem is they can't negotiate the treatments necessarily. So about
Mm,
8 years of age was, I think, the youngest that they had there. And then they were older up through adolescence. But some of the experiences there that were really, really jarring were taking histories from patients, from the children, talking to them about why they were here. Um, and then there were discussion groups that were led by some of the psychologists. So they'd get all the children in a circle and then talk to them about why they were here and what they were navigating. And to hear a child say that, like, oh, I want to kill myself. And then for a clinician to ask, well, like, wouldn't someone be sad? Isn't there someone you can live for, someone who's trying to keep you safe? And for them to say, no, no one would miss me.
mm,
That was a very challenging thing to hear.
mm,
Um, it was heartbreaking. So,
yeah.
but at the same time, it was really heartwarming to see the ways in which, I don't know, nurses and physicians would reach out to these kids, spend time talking to them, sitting in the hallways or the corridors, just kind of sitting by a door frame, sitting against a door frame and just waiting for a kid to be ready to talk. Um, those kinds of things, seeing the sort of abject horror of children being so psychologically impaired and so damaged where they want to end their lives. And yet people who are present and trying to rectify that in any way. Um, that was a tension that, like, I got to walk for about 3 weeks, and I don't know if I want to walk it any longer than 3 weeks, but
Mm, yeah.
that was a tough thing.
Yeah, I'm guessing probably a long and challenging 3 weeks those were.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Psychiatry here isn't, the psychiatry program here sometimes isn't as demanding, because what you do in psychiatry isn't as time demanding as some other specialties. So oftentimes we as medical students with fewer responsibilities would get off in the early afternoon,
Mm,
whereas on other specialties you're there all day with everyone else because there are so many things you can do. But I did find on those 3 weeks that I was more tired. I was
mm,
emotionally drained. It was a very intense time. What about?
yeah.
Because I know you've spent some time with children in sort of a neuro aspect in your work. What about your experiences?
Yeah. Well, the first thing that comes to mind, it's just so interesting as far as the ages and it is heartbreaking, when you talk about these very young kids going through this. And for those people who don't know, I do kind of neuro rehabilitation work, working with neurotechnologies at an addiction medicine center, but we also treat mental health. So And we see people from all ranges of ages. We don't see kids that young. I'd say maybe 17. I think there may have been a 16-year-old, is kind of the cutoff. Um, but it's really crazy. I mean, because you get sort of the people who are kind of older and have been through so much hardship in their life, where they've picked up a drinking problem. They're drinking a fifth of whiskey a night, just so they can sleep. They're a fireman, a police officer, a noble person in society. And they've just kind of ran out of options, and they're self-medicating to try to relieve their pain, whether that be emotional or physical. um, but then when they kind of see the younger kids, it's like they're like, oh my God, like I can't, they get almost so heartbroken for the kids that they see, because it's like they know, like, they've been through so much hardship, and then they see these kids, like, who've come in at maybe half the age and have all of these different psychiatric diagnoses and
Right.
drug abuse. And it's something that's, I feel like, in a way, maybe you know good to catch early,
Yeah.
but at the same time, it's something I think, like, uh, it kind of can be something where you may kind of hold on to a lot of stuff, and you carry that kind of maybe emotional baggage, through the decades. And then, I'm kind of seeing people kind of, go through a various number of different kind of therapies at this place.
Yeah.
And some of the therapies are kind of it very much opens them up.
Right.
Specifically, something I'm really interested in, there's a breathing group that occurs at this place. So
Uh-huh.
it's something, I don't know if you've ever heard the concept of holotropic breathing.
Perfect breathing.
So this
Maybe you can
is,
find it.
okay, so this is a guy, the guy that invented it, Stanislav Grof. He
Mm.
was actually the guy who, I believe, like, pioneered a lot of the LSD experiments, I think in the 60s and 70s. So the basis behind this breathing, approach was to sort of recreate some of the sort of psychedelic and therapeutic nature of a drug like
Mm.
LSD,
Mm.
with basically kind of a controlled sort of hyperventilation,
Yeah.
um, that puts people in these very deep kind of emotionally opened up states, where it's like, you know the,
Mm.
the the craziest stories come out, where they remember, something. I remember, not don't want to get too detailed or whatever, but you
Right.
know, someone the other week had said something like, they had realized they basically they were doing a breathing session, and they realized, why they hated seeing people like in turtlenecks. Um,
Mm.
and it was like
Uh-huh.
they'd always just kind of unconsciously disliked that and
Mm.
been averse to that, but it was never fully conscious until they realized kind of a sort of
Yeah.
traumatic event, or traumatic person that had been wearing that, and they made that connection. And I think it's crazy, because I mean there are all these things, from childhood. Obviously, no one has a perfect childhood, but certainly the tougher the childhood, I think what's sad is just seeing, I feel like, I don't know if you see anything with these kids, but just because they're so young, but having problems, kind of maybe going, when they go through school, and then that kind of almost sets them back when it comes to actually getting out of school and being able to live, kind of a successful, happy life,
Yeah.
because they've got all of this stuff to, that's kind of on their plate that, they shouldn't really have to be dealing with at that young age.
Yeah.
You know, do you think, I mean, is that a problem you think is increasing, as far as like, I mean, kids that young, like, wanting to kill themselves? Is that, I mean, I'm just thinking, when, now we kind of in the state of our society where, we're seeing all these school shootings and
Yeah.
oftentimes, it's, kind of, adolescents, teenagers, 16, 17, 18-year olds who are the shooters oftentimes. And uh, I mean, what's been, what's gone on to kind of create this sort of
Right.
almost epidemic we have in this society? And it seems like, kind of, rough childhood experiences can definitely take a toll.
Yeah, think I my supposition would be that this kind of thing is on the rise, and that there is a net increase in like psychological disturbance compared to days of old. And there's obviously there's always this like the past is better fallacy.
Hmm.
There was a a recent political campaign essentially founded on that idea. So I want to sort of distance myself from that. But I do think that there's been sort of a net increase in this, and I wonder about the causes. I was just thinking while you were talking about school shootings, the horrors that those present, and about the challenges that children face. I wonder if there's, in terms of the evils that people do now, I wonder if there's been a slow distancing in people's minds between cause and effect.
Mm.
Um, just wondering that because of how complex society is now, we as humans are still probably about the same psychologically speaking, but we're faced with so many new challenges and so many new complexities. I wonder if we've started to learn a different distance between cause and effect. And what I mean by that is, imagine you are, living on a farm in the, I don't know, you could go 1600s or something like that. Everything, the speed between cause and effect is very quick then. If you don't do the right thing, you might die today, you know, or, the next day. Or if you don't get out there and farm today, like you could have a big problem. You can't call in sick days. People would have a number of children. Many of them would die from things that people will not die from now. So maybe there was a familiarity with death. Then
Mm.
there was an understanding of like life's necessities that caused people to have maybe a more cohesive view of life.
Mm.
That made it so like there wasn't an inclination to go out and cause carnage necessarily, without sufficient reason. And sufficient reason, of course, could be your the sufficient reasons for causing carnage in the old days, we think of now as barbaric. I mean, some of the wars that we saw in the past were like, the Crusades, like that was kind of barbaric. And so the reasoning there wasn't great. But I'm just wondering if there's a difference today in people's lives that causes them to have a different value of human life or a different understanding of it.
Hmm. Yeah, that's an interesting perspective because yeah, definitely understanding the value of a human life. I mean, since on a day-to-day basis, I feel like most of us, today are not, kind of maybe, kind of walking those lines between life and death like you may have been, you were saying in the 1600s where, you get sick, you get pneumonia, you're probably dead, right? As far as today, there's, pretty much, the medical remedy to a lot of,
Right.
which were what were, life-threatening things before. So I think a lot of us go through life, not really, fearing death on a day-to-day basis, except for people in those kind of professions, where they,
Right.
soldiers or first
Yeah.
responders.
Right.
But yeah, I think and then also just kind of, I mean, obviously there's like people who's bringing the violent video games, and I'm not sure as far as, if the studies on that, I haven't necessarily been kept abreast of, whether that is a contributor, but it certainly sort of creates, I think, like a paradigm shift where,
Right.
it's more of like I mean, it's like in these games, you're kind of just killing people for fun, and there's not really any ramification of doing so, and
Right.
you don't really have to like fully experience what it would be like to kill another person. You
Right.
just kill someone, or you get shot, and then you just respond.
Right.
You just
Right.
there's
Respond.
no punishments like there would be for a
Right.
real life kind of life death encounter. So
Right.
I also wonder, just different dynamics that has kind of set up, if that has at all
Right.
contributed to this problem.
Right. And more broadly, just the extent to which people live virtual lives, I think is may also contribute. And
Mm,
the things is I think those things contribute to like child psychology, not necessarily always because those children are engaging in these behaviors, but that the people around them are, and that
mm,
really affects the way that they treat children. So, for example, if you have like if I'm a person who spends a lot of time, in a virtual state of reality, I might not necessarily want to sit down and listen to a child because
mm,
children don't make a lot of sense. They have very tangential brains. They're making sense of the world. They lie about stuff all the time. They tell long, long stories that like aren't true because they're making sense of the world. They're telling narratives. Few people necessarily want to make the time to just sit down and just listen to a kid,
mm,
to play with a kid, and let the kid determine what the game is and what the rules are. And then simultaneously, many people don't have time just purely from an economic standpoint. I mean, you can't fault, you know, a mother of three for not having enough time to sit down and individually read to each of her children. So I
mm,
think some of the things that are going on in society negatively affect children just by proximity to them. Not necessarily that kids are engaging in these behaviors, but the fallout of others' engagement.
right, right. And I think it often kind of creates this cycle where it can kind of get passed down generations, where if you're a kid, where you've witnessed certain things or your parents treat you a certain way, I think, we've seen that that's kind of more likely to repeat itself, no matter even if you kind of want it to change and want to be a different parent. I think oftentimes people, kind of fall back into the habits of, at least I've kind of heard, I can't speak from personal experience. I'm not a father, but people just talking about, falling back kind of in the habits of their parents and some of
Yeah,
the negative things. So I think it definitely, kind of other people and especially adults obviously play a huge role in kind of shaping and molding, our brains as kids, where we're so impressionable. We take in everything, and we analyze how, all these people are doing things, and if they're not paying attention to us, we wonder, is it because I'm not, lovable or something? Like even if the real reason might be, the mom has to, work
right,
to whatever, 40-hour jobs or whatever, to economically support the kid. The kid could still kind of be under the misunderstanding that, the mom isn't spending time because she,
yeah,
doesn't care, doesn't love the kid, right? Like,
right.
I think it could be hard to kind of understand some of the reasons that parents are doing the things that they do, when we're
Yeah.
kids. Yeah,
And
yeah,
hopefully, kids realize that soon enough to forgive their parents,
right.
as they grow older. But
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think it's one of those things where it's like, they're doing the best they can, almost always, I think. And as a kid, it's like sort of like you're like, oh, you could have done better. But I
yeah,
think it maybe, at least kind of as I've matured, I feel like, you get to more of a point of like, kind of mutual understanding and respect, and realizing that they really did, do the best that they could have, in the situation they were in,
yeah,
whatever that may have been. Um, but yeah, yeah, I think it's definitely maybe, something you kind of realize, with maturing, maybe not always right, a parent right away.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to sort of transition the conversation into something, you had previously told me, and I don't know why this had sort of stuck in my head for all these years, because this was back a few years ago. We had a great conversation, I think, on the car ride back,
Yeah,
uh, when you were bringing me back to Eugene after we went wakeboarding,
yeah.
and you said something that just stuck in my head, which was about. It was basically, and I don't know how much you remember this, but you were basically talking. We had a long conversation, but we were talking about how, and you were talking about how, intelligence in a person is really reflected kind of by their humor. Do you sort of
Hmm.
remember talking about that?
You know,
It's been a while.
that sounds like something I might say, and the reason I say that is I think my dad may have said that to me once. Maybe my mom may have said that to me once or something. But yeah, I think I've told other people that. So I definitely
Okay.
think I told you that. Yeah, for sure. I
Yeah.
remember that conversation. It may have come up. I don't know. We were talking about friends, and we were talking. I probably brought up a conversation about romantic interests because that's something that I often bring up in conversation. But um, yeah,
Yeah.
I do think the reason I think that humor has a lot of correlation with intelligence is, to me, um, humor is about making um, humor is about making a novel connection between two different things that
Hmm.
is that is unexpected. I think a lot of the
Hmm.
unexpected is something that lends itself to humor. Seeing things in a new light. That's sort of like the essence of puns, for example,
Hmm.
which is wordplay. And a lot of people hate on puns, but I think puns are a perfect example of humor because it's a person who's recognizing a similarity between two different things, if that's the sound of the word or the spelling, and it like relocates two things next to each other that most people don't place there. And I think that's the foundation of a lot of humor. I mean, if you watch talk show hosts, they're just making connections all over the place between among a whole bunch of different subjects. And that is, I think, an example of intelligence, is you're able to network all of these different things together. Or if
Hmm.
there's a humorous way of saying something, it might indicate someone's thought about something for a while. So I think that might be
Hmm.
my insight.
Yeah, yeah, no, that is, some of the stuff we were talking about before, and
Yeah.
I think about, you say something that makes people laugh. It's usually something that they haven't really heard before, at least
Mm-hmm.
exactly in those words. So it is sort of
Right.
something that's unexpected. You're putting two and two together in a new way that kind of hasn't been seen before by other people, and that's I think why we have that positive reaction where it's sort of like laughter in a way I feel like is sort of appreciated, it's a form of appreciating,
Yeah.
someone
Yeah.
else's, kind of creativity, and sort of, I don't know, being, our moods kind of
Yeah.
elevate because of that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, yeah, I don't know what else there is to say about that, but it's yeah, humor, I that had always stuck in my head because I mean, I really do think that's kind of the case where, um, I think, humor is such a powerful force, for good. I don't know if is that something you ever employ kind of, as a, as you become a doctor with,
Oh yeah, absolutely.
patients. It's sort of a way
Absolutely.
to break the ice, right?
Yeah, totally. Yeah. I mean, obviously smiling, making people feel safe is a huge part of it, but I think a way to make people feel safe is to demonstrate a sense of humor, you
Hmm.
know? I, and I think another thing that yeah, making jokes around patients is a little tricky sometimes, because you don't want anyone to think you're not being serious about their health.
Sure.
But I think almost everyone can understand that like life itself isn't serious in all cases. Um, for example, sometimes patients have like maybe a little kid or something is sick, right? And say that child has a disease that I can pass on to someone else by touch. So that they sometimes make us put on these huge gowns, and so you put this big gown on, and then you have to put these gloves on and all this stuff, and you can like look really intimidating. But
Mm.
if you're able to make yourself look kind of clunky and clownish in these
Mm.
gowns, you can get the child to laugh. So they're like
Right.
expecting something scary, but you end up being funny, and that can make them laugh. And I think
Right.
this thing can happen with physicians. You know, you make a joke about something, obviously not like necessarily about them, but you know, like you look funny. You know that's not great humor, but you know, making someone laugh makes them comfortable. And I think it's also an acknowledgement of like the unexpected. Like all of us are taken aback in some way at life, and no one can really foresee everything. So we got to laugh about some things. But
Right.
I use humor as a medical student like all the time.
Yeah. No, I mean, I definitely do too. Just seeing because I see patients, doing the neuro treatment with them, and I'm not their therapist. I'm not a psychiatrist. I'm there to do, the treatment, but the relationship often kind of it can it could just be me simply setting up the technology and leaving the room and going to set the next person up. And, sometimes it does happen like that when people are just kind of closed off and they don't really want any further interaction. But oftentimes what happens is develop these really kind of deep connections with people. And often it sort of starts with, because at first you're just being like very professional, making sure, you're doing everything, to the highest, degree of professionalism really. But then, say they make a joke and bust your balls about something,
Yeah,
and you're
yeah,
like, oh man, like, I don't necessarily have to, like
right.
it's sort of in a way. I remember when I first started this job, there was a patient who would do that to me, and it was like
Hmm.
it got me to relax because I
Right.
was so anxious and sort of uptight at first, just learning the job and sort of learning that whole dynamic of patient um,
Yeah.
interactions, which is really kind of difficult to learn that. And that was something for me, I sort of took that on myself, and then tried to sort of employ that when I can sense some kind of maybe apprehension, or people are just a little kind of closed off for whatever reason. Um, I think, in addition to just making them feel, safe and like you're, really, have their best interest, I think humor is an awesome way to kind of just show them, that you're human too. That it's sort of a way to be like, we're similar, like we experience the same things, the same humorous situations, the same
Yeah.
um, maybe the same struggles, and to laugh about those, maybe common struggles, I think is super powerful with that, just as that kind of connection develops.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
way
Humor.
of showing you don't take yourself too seriously. Yeah.
Yeah. That takes all the fun out of it, right? I think
Exactly.
it's like, yeah, whenever I see like, I mean, that I've always kind of like feared that with like becoming an adult, which is like that I will get to a point where I take everything so seriously and don't
Yeah.
find the humor in things and don't, monkey around and make jokes and like, because I feel like that's me, is to just be in
Yeah.
some ways still just a rambunctious kind of teenager, even though I'm not anymore. But I think
Right.
there's a lot of, in addition to just like maturing, in a lot of other ways, I think it's good to like take some of those childish habits and
Hmm.
keep them going through adulthood. I think
Hmm.
it's sad when you see adults who kind of lose touch with their sort of kid side.
Totally.
You think?
Totally. Yeah. I mean, I think that's a sad thing. Just in because there's an extent to which I can respect a person who decides to be 100% professional all the time,
Hmm.
in medicine or in other fields. Like, you know, I don't, I think a nurse or a banker or a policeman who's, you know, anyone who's just 100% serious all the time, they can be competent, they can contribute to society. Like, I applaud them for it. But at the same time, there's a level of competence that I think everyone needs to meet in order to make like life manageable for everyone, like everyone fulfilling all their jobs just at a certain level of competence. But there's this whole area up here that is open to us to just like hold the door open for someone, make people laugh while we're doing our jobs. And that to me is like, that's what makes life rewarding. And that's what like makes life healing, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Have
Yeah.
therapeutic with people.
Yeah, sort of going above and beyond in the sense of you've fulfilled sort of your job obligations in a sense, but you're still doing these things that maybe you don't have to, but you do have to sort of feel like you're being true to yourself and
Right.
right. And you mentioned something earlier, which I'm just thinking of now, which is about how you sort of I think you said this on air about how you kind of take, like your job sort of as, becoming a doctor and going through med school, you're happy to sort of talk to just random, it's kind of like kind of just other people about like you may get off work, but you sort of still kind of
Mhm.
carry that along.
Yeah.
Can you expand a little on that?
Yeah, I think what I'm intending by that, I think that a lot of anyone who takes their job and decides to make it into sort of a profession for them will do this. But I think one thing that is valuable, I remember I've seen physicians who in their lives, they have a unique wealth of knowledge that not everyone gets to have. Um, and they will share that with other people. So if they, if say a doctor makes it known that, she's a physician, then other people might be able to say, oh, hey, like I have this thing. What do you think about it?
Hmm.
And this could be in a grocery store. This could be, in a place of worship. This could be anywhere.
Hmm.
And obviously, I think if this physician, if she has a sense of humor, that will make her more approachable and therefore
Hmm.
better able to fulfill her job. But I think being the kind of person and the way that I would like to be is the kind of person that people find approachable, that I can't solve all problems at all times, but being someone who's not just a provider of care in a work setting, but someone who makes medicine more accessible and who makes health more accessible, like on a
Hmm.
day-to-day basis, um,
Right. And
both
that
by
seems
example and conversation.
right. I mean, that seems like something I think, and I don't know how many doctors kind of share that perspective versus, I think with a lot of the rest of us, our work is kind of disconnected, maybe from our personal lives. Maybe sometimes for the better. I think it's good to have a little distance between the two, potentially, kind of depending on what you do and who you are as a person, maybe. But
Right.
it's interesting though, because I feel like a lot of people would sort of want to just completely abandon their work and be like, ah, you obviously do very stressful things, as a medical student, and some people I'm assuming would want to just, completely kind of kick back and sort of relax in a sense. So what
Yeah.
what what makes you have that sort of um, that desire to get that kind of, to still be kind of serving your purpose, um, not just while you're at work.
I think the desire to still be serving a purpose while not at work. I think, the answer has to do a lot with the kind of I'm in an ethics class right now, and so we talked a little bit about character ethics, but I do think it has something to do with the kind of character that I or others or you try to develop, because it's not necessarily a job that makes you want to share that job with everyone or be available to everyone, but kind of a type of person or a way of being that you just want to be out there being available to others to help other people. So I think that's part of what drives me. Medicine is uniquely, maybe not uniquely, because I think you can do it with anything, but medicine has a position of, almost everyone will have some kind of illness, and so almost everyone will have some kind of question. So being available and open to talk about that is is something that's easy in medicine. But I'm a kind of person who likes talking about things. I like sharing interesting information with other people. So it follows naturally from my personality too.
Hmm.
So
Right, right. And one of the things I kind of find most rewarding, about my job is I do, and I don't think I mentioned this to you, I do these neuropsych education groups where I'm
mm-hmm.
basically leading sort of a class, um, sort of sometimes a lecture, more so kind of a discussion. But it's sort of, I feel like in a sense like my way of sort of like I can like do all this research, or sometimes I'll talk about heart rate variability and how it's kind of an indicator of resilience to stress, and talk about different things that people can do that improves their heart rate variability, or um, bless you. Or just other. I'm very I read a lot about kind of diet, nutrition, and the brain, and I feel like it's my favorite part of the job. Honestly, is probably kind of just being able to sort of impart my knowledge and like distill
Yeah,
that. Because I spend hours, whether it's reading books or research papers, and oftentimes it's like you may not really like talk to anyone about, some
yeah,
kind of like obscure paper, but if I get something out of that, I'm like, oh, like this could actually like make a real difference to real people. Then it's like
yeah,
I'm so eager to share that information. I think
yeah,
that was one of the things that kind of spurred me towards this area of sort of what's called like applied neuroscience, where
yeah,
it's not necessarily you're not just stuck in a lab. Like, I mean, don't get me wrong, there's cool stuff, not to knock anything off of my experience working, at the lab at Oregon, and labs around the country, are doing amazing, awesome things with, neuroscience and the brain, but it's it can be a tedious process kind of, with academia,
yeah,
and it can be hard to actually see your hard work and your dedication kind of get reflected in people's improvements in people's well-being.
right.
And I think I'm guessing me and you are kind of in similar boats with that. Is one of the real rewarding parts of our jobs is actually being able to see this, in your case medicine, and in my case kind of the neurotechnology sort of stuff actually being applied, and see people benefit from it.
Yeah, totally, totally.
Yeah, super rewarding. But I wanna talk to you about you mentioned the bioethics. This is a sort of a master's degree program you're pursuing now, right?
Just starting, yeah.
You're just starting, okay. And bioethics. So, you know, what I mean, it sounds like kind of, I mean, obviously as a doctor, I'm thinking, or just practicing medicine, there's, a lot of ethical, you want, your doctor to be ethical, right? Like what is the medical, the, the medical, what is it? The oath, like to do no harm, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
So obviously, I mean, it seems kind of like a natural, did it seem to you like that it was sort of a natural thing to do to pursue that
Yeah,
program?
for me it was. I mean, I've loved interdisciplinary work since high school, and then in college I did biology and humanities. So I love places where there's an interplay of multiple disciplines. So for me, like going into medicine and then thinking, oh wow, I can study bioethics and bring in all the knowledge of the humanities and philosophy, and then marry that with like applied science through medicine. To me, that was like that's totally right up my alley. And I think having as many physicians as possible um, who feel qualified or who feel able to sort of spend the time with bioethics, then I think the better. Absolutely.
Hmm.
So I'm happy to be among those.
Okay. I've
Mm-hmm.
got I've got maybe what might be kind of a challenging potentially bioethic question for you. You
Uh-oh.
know, And it's just more of a more general kind of question, but say, and we sort of talked a little off air about this, but as we're sort of developing so much better technology and practices in applying and treating patients, and also learning so much about genes and kind of gene environment interactions and epigenetics, which I am super fascinated with all that. But also learning, kind of how some of our uh, kind of I mean, I don't really want to use the word destiny, but somewhat of our life trajectory is influenced, if not kind of decided by genetics. And when you get into these sort of cases where we're gaining more and more knowledge, but then it uh, kind of the ethical dilemma I think can often come up where it's like, do you do you let the patients have access to as much information as kind of they want, or is it do you feel a responsibility as kind of a medical provider to sort of limit that to some information maybe to either psychologically I'm guessing oftentimes like it would be the psychological damage that could kind of you could kind of inflict upon a patient. Do you have any just kind of ways that you approach those situations? Do you let people make the choices or like to think that like people should have the choices for themselves or do you think there should be some kind of like more kind of control over that?
Yeah, control of knowledge is a great way of staying in power, so I'm all for it. Um, but I do think that I think that say this kind of comes up to an extent if a patient is diagnosed with some illness, and then asking a patient how much they want to know about their illness. Um, so whenever there's like knowledge that is known, um, moving aside like from the conversation about how much we can know to just like when we do know something, I think that it's the responsibility of any clinician to understand the potential implications of that knowledge for a patient, and then to lead that patient through a conversation, saying, we have knowledge about X, Y, or Z, say
Hmm.
your diagnosis. There's a lot of information here. Some of it's difficult to understand. Some of it could be unnerving. And to say, like, you can decide how much you want to know
Hmm.
because you respect the person's dignity and their autonomy
Hmm.
and saying, like, it's up to you about how much you want to know. But as a professional, as someone who does this kind of thing daily, I've found that in my opinion, people do better if they know X amount. They know 50% about this, or they know everything
Hmm.
about it. So I think there's a role to be played in as kind of an editor of information, or
Hmm.
as someone who's kind of a guide to information,
Hmm.
maybe. But obviously, I do think that the patient should have control over how much they know. I mean, they can even
Right.
say, I don't want to know anything, which is a little unnerving sometimes. It's like, well, I mean, you should.
Right.
Some control.
Some control. Yeah, that
But,
and that's one thing it bothers me when I, hear people, say like, stuff about kind of not, they sort of think that they don't have any control over maybe some kind of condition, that they may actually have, that the research has actually shown, that they can actually make kind of epigenetic kind of
yeah,
changes and
right.
turn on or off genes that may be associated with that disease disorder, and they're not necessarily stuck with that sort of fate. And I think that's something especially that comes up when it comes to psychiatry and brain sort of stuff, because
Right.
oftentimes people will kind of get slapped with the label of depression or anxiety, and I think sometimes it can be like sort of helpful for the person to be like, oh, like now I understand like why I've been feeling the way I have, like, and there's actually like a reason, a kind of a chemical imbalance maybe, going on in my brain. And it's sort of, I think for some people sort of validating, but then other times I think people sort of misread like the purpose of that kind of diagnosis, and they sort of they come in, fresh out of the psychiatry office,
Right.
and they sort of like, it's as if they're saying like, um, oh, I'm a, 25% Native American, like it's if they did, some, you know, um,
Right.
genetic test, and like they're like, oh, I guess I have anxiety, like as if it's something that's set in stone.
Right.
So I think there is, it's interesting. I mean, I'm the type of person where I'd like kind of the maximum amount of control
Yeah.
over my fate. But at the same time, I understand that not everyone is maybe as interested in their own biology, or for whatever reason, if they did have some kind of very serious disease where they were kind of predicting death, where that could sort of complicate things as far as how much you'd want to know. Um, but yeah, I think it's something. It seems like just as humans, like we're just curious, like as kids, we're getting into things we're not supposed to, and
Yeah.
you know, playing with things we're not supposed to, whatever. And it's it seems hard to think that people like patients would know that there is this information out there, that there may be something that they could at least know that may in some way help them better, handle or deal with
Right.
whatever diagnosis they have. It's hard to imagine them being able to kind of go through life day to day, being able to just push that, sort of
Right.
out of. Do you ever think about that, like with people, like, and you're just like, man, like if I was them, like I really would want to know.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I've definitely felt that. I've definitely felt that sometimes.
Yeah.
Because I likewise am a person who likes to maximize control over things and maximize the will aspect, the free will aspect, maximize the, potential. Um, but and I do think that that's a mindset that we should like encourage other people to accept. Like the more control people accept over their own lives, the better, I think. But at the same time, I think one of the things that I run into with people is they've got like so many stressors and so many things going on, and they just can't even. It's too much. So that's just
Mhm.
information that can't fit in their paradigm. Um,
Right.
so I think a lot of times, like control is kind of dependent on resources. So, some people don't have the resources to come to terms with their illness or something.
That makes sense.
And so
I
I think,
think.
yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna, add that I think it's really powerful that we at least have the, you know, whatever it is, if it's test results, that are still available maybe whenever that person, if they ever come to a point
Right,
where they're either, kind of emotionally or, um, where they're just ready to handle whatever it is,
right,
they always kind of have that opportunity, right, to kind of go back, um,
totally,
and get more information.
totally, yeah. That the door's always open. The
Right.
phone lines are always on. We'll
Yeah.
always have the conversation anytime. I think that's a really good thing. So I think providing that information at the same time with hopefully the resources to be able to deal with it.
Hmm.
There have been too many times where someone's gotten a phone call like while they're driving home from work, and someone says, "All right, you have cancer. You know, I'll call you later about what we're going to do. Bye."
Hmm.
That kind of thing happens every day, and
Hmm.
that in those ways, I think it's kind of an abuse. It's kind of a psychological abuse, and I think some of that comes from a physician or some other kind of provider not recognizing the impact that this thing will have on someone. Maybe thinking like, I need to make these 12 calls before I can go home,
Hmm.
and one of them happens to be telling someone that they're diagnosed with cancer. So I just have to hit these calls.
Mm-hmm.
Because we're all driven, you know, to keep on moving and to produce.
Right.
You know, so that knowledge without the resources to deal with it becomes destabilizing. So I think anytime that people can share knowledge with a framework in order to situate that knowledge, you know, I think that's what it's about.
Right. Yeah, that's an interesting thing to think about when it's, yeah, like, like you don't think, I guess, about from the doctor's perspective, if they've had a long day and, they're ready to be, going home from work. And I think it's, just kind of making it more big picture, I don't know if you've seen any of the research, kind of the psychological research about, what's likely to happen as far as judge decisions in court cases
Mm.
and how it actually varies, by the time of day. So you're
I think I
actually
heard a little bit about that once, but go on. Go on.
yeah, you're the study I'm thinking of, and I think there may have been a couple, but basically looking at, how, your best sort of shot of I think, if it was getting bond or just getting a better, sentence or outcome, was more likely early in the morning, when the judge is fresh. Um, and then
Yeah.
it sort of starts going down throughout the day, but then it
Mm.
goes back up at lunchtime.
Mm.
The judge eats lunch, they're
Mm.
back, got a little more brain power going on. And
Yeah.
then, they're able to kind of sustain that, for a little while, but then it comes to the end of the day. And then, what we think of as very like unpartial kind of like fair decisions actually have so much to do just with like the
Mm.
judge, like it's all about sort of the decision fatigue and
Yeah.
our ability. We don't have endless mental resources to
Right.
have willpower to think you know through all these things. So it's sort of at the end of the day, they're just kind of like, well, I can't really fully think about this, so you're
Mm.
getting a tougher
Mm.
sentence or whatever. I'm
Mm.
not granting bond for you.
Mm.
But I think about that when it comes to doctors. I don't think it's as maybe well talked about. But just yeah, I mean, I would think just going through the day, you're at the end of a long day, and then you're supposed to call someone who
Mm.
and tell them this thing that's gonna
Yeah.
change. Like it's not gonna. It may not change your life. Like you may be just getting ready to drive home and you
Mm.
know go make some
Yeah.
pizza or whatever. But
Yeah.
with them, you're about to tell something. They're not going to just go home and make pizza. Like they're
Yeah.
that person you tell that they
Yeah.
have cancer to. That person is like that's one of probably big maybe the biggest thing
Yeah.
that they've announcement they've heard in their life. Like
Yeah.
that's do you kind of take that on as sort of like I would guess that you kind of do, right? As sort of a responsibility where even if you are kind of fatigued or tired throughout the day, like you still sort of have that sort of responsibility to not just go through and get your job done, but to really provide the best kind of care for patients that you can.
Yeah. I mean, to me, that's one of those. That is the ideal, I think, in medicine, as a profession. That there's a that the best interests of the patient are kept above like personal interests as a physician. You know, and I think that's a differentiating factor in the field. And thinking like, you know, we are all humans, and to some, you know, but and we're all in this together, but and because of that, um, you know, it's my duty to spend a little bit of extra time in this phone call, or to spend a little bit of extra time and try to get this person into the office sooner, to create that time, carve out that time to be human, to respect that dignity, to be emotionally available. But
Hmm.
that's a demand that's really great. It's a huge demand, and so upon physicians or other providers to be able to care in that way. And I think that's an ideal that we need to hold ourselves to, because I think that's central to what being a doctor, in my case, is about. Um, but it is something that, you know, I think some doctors aren't willing necessarily to take on. And I think people suffer a little more because of it. But
Mm,
I'm not there yet, So
right.
I've had long days in medical school, but I haven't necessarily had a long day when it was my decision, and when it's all on me. I'm carrying the weight, and I need to get home, and I haven't been there yet, but
Yeah.
I want to set on a trajectory to be in the right place when I'm there.
Right. Right. I guess all you can do is kind of best prepare yourself kind of for that potential unknown of what that actually is going to be like before you actually kind of walk a day in those shoes.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I mean, it seems like something in the medical field where doctors do seem to be more and more, there's more and more pressure on them, I think, to maybe see more patients, to
There
see as
is,
many patients and,
there is,
press in the times of those, appointments. I mean, I certainly see that, with my job and just, big emphasis on just seeing as many patients as we possibly can.
yeah,
Um, and in some ways, it's good that we're providing the most. We're trying to get as many patients in for help, as we can. But
right,
but then there's still the dilemma of like, are we maybe providing um, the best that we have for each individual patient? When there are those sort of external pressures. Um, and I'm sort of curious, maybe, as sort of just, maybe wrapping up, this really interesting discussion we've been having,
yeah,
how do you see, kind of the, say in the US, with the medical system obviously has, you know, I mean, we certainly have, a medical system that has saved, tons and tons of people and is doing all crazy, awesome things, but at the same time, we've just kind of in the news lately, they've been talking about like the different like the state and local government, or I think it's the state governments like who are, suing the opioid companies,
yeah,
kind of in charge of the opioid epidemic. And so obviously there's, the failures and successes of the medical system. Do you
right.
see anything glaring to you where you're sort of, you come at it from sort of a fresh perspective where you're newly witnessing all of this stuff. And
Yeah.
is there anything that just, you've shown up and you're like, why do we do this way? Wouldn't it be better if we did it this way? Like, do you have any strong feelings about that when it comes to the medical system here?
Yeah. I think I think one thing, oh man, everything is there's so many, like it's one of those things where like the problem is such a complex like network of issues that the solution has to be this really complex network of issues. And so like no one congressional bill is going to be able to like knock all of them out and like fix everything. And so you're going to have to pick one of the issues, right?
Mm,
And then when you pick one of the issues, you're neglecting the other issues that are also central to the problem because everything's interconnected. And so then the people who want one of those things to be the number one issue are going to start fighting. And anyway, so I think that's one of the things that impedes care.
mm,
Um, but man, what's one of the glaring things? I think I think maybe one of the most glaring things. I'm going to try to point a finger away somehow. Um, point a finger in a different direction than for me. But I think one thing that would be really valuable is providing more health education to the public in in some in some other form, because I think there are a lot of things that people do because they think they're healthy when they're not healthy, and there are a lot of things that people could easily do to become more healthy that don't necessarily like jive with their idea of how to live life well. And
mm,
the probably the best way to communicate that is through like one-on-one relationships between a physician and a patient, or an advanced care provider and a patient, or a nurse and a patient. But often isn't enough time in those interactions to cause that education to take place. So I think
Mm.
some form of education, whether that comes through grade schools, like putting in health curriculum courses, uh,
Mm.
beyond like, when you get in later grades, beyond like sex ed courses, like
Mm.
just be a healthy person. Like these are things to do to be healthy. Um, Creating that is, I mean, that's part of the physical education curriculum to an extent, but I
Mm.
creating that through schooling, creating that like, in daycares, the dissemination of like healthcare teaching, not just healthcare knowledge, because you can put as much knowledge as you want out there, but like, structured teaching and that
Mm.
education make a difference. But
Yeah, it just reminds me. There's this quote I really love from Napoleon. I don't know if you've read Napoleon Hill, Think and Grow Rich.
I've heard of
It
it.
was
Heard
one
of
of
it.
the kind of like OG self-help books,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and one of the things in there, there's actually a chapter on this where it's like there's like the common saying that like knowledge is power. Like, but
Mm-hmm.
but as you were kind of saying, like you got to actually do something with that knowledge. So it's like his approach is that knowledge is potential power. That knowledge is sort of giving you the resources, but then you still got to figure out how to act on those resources to actually make some
Right,
kind of difference, right?
right. But yeah, I think to me, I'm the kind of person who takes a much more like there's kind of a systemic view of changes, but to me, like, and that's sort of where I'm going out with the educational thing. But to me, in a much less interesting view, is sort of the local view of how to change things. And to me, that kind of comes down to the kind of person we are, or the kind of physician, nurse, advanced care provider, tech that you are. And and I think the more we can do to kind of, you know, insurance companies and commerce and the economy don't want this, but the more we can do to like slow time down for people who are experiencing things that are new for them, the more we can slow time down, engage considerately and thoughtfully, listen well, I think the better. And I think that kind of activity of trying to slow things down, of trying to listen a little bit more to the patient's concerns and
Hmm.
approach those directly, um, I think that will improve healthcare a little more because there's definitely an impetus to just go fast, 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 find out what the problem is that sort of fits with what the patient's saying, and then run tests on that, and then give them a treatment option, give them kind of a menu of things that they can do about it, not really offer guidance, like, or just pick one for them and then just shuttle them through. Because the faster you can do that process, the more you can bill for things, and so the more
Hmm.
the insurance company can bill and get money, and then the economy just grows and balloons and whatnot.
Right.
Um, but the more you can kind of slow the process down so people understand what's going on and feel a part of the process, the more you get buy-in, and the more people start to take control of their health.
Hmm.
Of course, you're always, I don't think we'll ever get away from illness, but I think
Hmm.
the more we do that, the better. And I think that comes in your profession, and I think that comes in everyone's profession to kind of take an extra step, explain a little,
Yeah.
create a little more relationship.
Right. No, I think you're providing an exemplary example of doing that, of acting that way. And I think once you get to actually become a doctor, I think you're gonna, really lead the way when it comes to that. So, I think man, you got big things to come in the future. So I'm
You too.
excited to keep track of it, and
Yeah.
definitely it was a pleasure having you on the show today.
Yeah, it was a
Uh,
pleasure to be with
Great
you
discussion. Yeah.
as
Is
well.
there, I ask people, I don't know if there's any, whether it's a social media platform, and obviously you don't have to, it's like a personal thing. But if there is, I don't know if there is any resource you want to plug, um, here's your chance.
I think the um, I don't necessarily have a resource, but if someone wanted to follow me on Instagram for the once or twice a year that I post something,
Okay.
it's my last name, Wallenkampf, Wallen as in Nancy, Kam as in Mary, P as in Paul, F as in Frank. I've said that on the phone like 5,000 times in my life. But that would be my Instagram handle. But maybe eventually I'll write something and I
Yeah.
plug it again. But yeah, I don't know. The thing to plug, if you want to read, I'll plug someone else's work.
Sure.
I
Yeah.
think Atul Gawande um, is one of the best current health writers in the U.S. I think another author, Danielle Ofri, I think, she is another excellent health writer today. They're both physicians who write about health. I've read their books and have been very inspired, so I'd recommend that to everyone.
Awesome. I'll be curious
Danielle,
to check those out too.
yeah, yeah.
Sweet,
Atul
man.
Gawande's book, Being Mortal, is a very heartfelt conversation on like death and dying in American
Okay.
medicine. And Danielle Ofri's book, What Doctors Feel, is a very interesting book about what it's like to be a doctor, to have relationships with patients, the role of empathy, things like
Interesting. Interesting. Well,
that.
yeah, I look forward to giving those a read.
Yeah, yeah,
Sweet, man. Well, thanks again. And for people who want to follow the podcast, we actually got a podcast Instagram now. It's Roscoe's Wetsuit Podcast. That is the Instagram handle.
yeah.
All run together. So go check us out. Keep track of the new releases of the latest episodes, and yeah, we'll try to do one every couple weeks. So you can definitely stay tuned for that. So
Yeah.
Karl, again, it's been a pleasure, man.
Toby, absolutely, man. Thank you so much for spending time with me.
Absolutely.